Hello there. I found an interesting retweet from Elon Musk, and I'd like to talk about it and some global implications. I just have some questions that I hope somebody can help me answer. So, this is the clip. Let's watch it, listen to it, and then we'll discuss.
The problem that South Africans have right now is that we don't understand white people. White people are inferior species to us. We are Homo sapiens. They've got Neanderthal blood in them. This is the science. And this is not science that was done by black people, it was done by them. You understand? About Clive W. Lewis, they were eugenicists. They studied this and they realized that they're inferior to blacks. The white population is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. For us, it makes no sense to descend into the savagery that they have. Whatever land that they're holding on to, either way, their numbers are dwindling. What?
So, let's stop and recap for a moment. First of all, they say, well, white people are less than black people because they have Neanderthal blood. That's an interesting thing to say. I am quite surprised that you can say that with a straight face. Whatever genetic differences there are, it's in fact the white cultures that created the technology and sailed the seas and conquered the entire continent. And really, the blacks didn't actually fight for their freedom. They just received it because the moral framework in white countries changed, and it became no longer fashionable to be colonizing places and conquering things. So basically, the governments replaced that strategy with soft power, economic and cultural power instead. How exactly did you reach the conclusion that you're superior, I wonder? Regardless, as for the shrinking thing, I'm going to point out that all people all across the globe are decreasing in terms of the number of children that they have. That's true for Africa as well. And if you look at the implications for, let's say, a couple of decades in the future, well, Africa would remain more populous than the developed Western world, let's say. It's still going on the same trajectory, and it's just going to take a few more years, another decade or two, to get them to the same ending as the white population will have. This seems to be a problem brought about, in my opinion, by technology and specifically by the very, how to put it, corporate world that we live in, where basically things that are very, very harmful to humans become legitimized and are left unchecked and untreated because they serve corporate interests or because the people who are behind those corporations have some agenda to make use of these side effects of certain technologies and materials that we use, radiation, plastics, chemicals in the water and such, that decrease fertility, and also because of the social changes that decrease fertility, both the push for transgenderism as well as the sort of economic downturn where it's very difficult to get a house, very difficult to become financially independent, and raising children is quite expensive these days. So the opportunity to become a parent is deprived from some people, a lot of people, in fact, today. This is an interesting take to say that white people are decreasing in population because of some genetic problem. I wonder how come the genetic problem didn't stop them from conquering the entirety of Africa like 200 years ago.
Whatever leadership that they had is dying out as well. And you know about wealth disappearing after the third generation that is passed down to, So they're on the last generation. We're dealing with the weakest whites that the world has ever seen.
That's another interesting thing to say. The third generation thing, basically, he's using it as an attack, but really, it's been used as a mark of the success of Western civilization. Where basically, if you get rich, the average person, by the third generation, it would probably have been squandered, and then they would be going back to being middle class or even less, which means that you can go up or down based on your own merit. And basically, the usual way it goes is that someone very competent and hardworking comes along, and leaves a lot to his heirs, and then they might not be quite as conscientious and hardworking. They might have an easier time in life, and they will pass maybe the same or maybe even less to their heirs, and their heirs will be even more spoiled and even more wasteful, and they will squander whatever they got. And so this non-permanent upper class has been touted as success because it means that there is mobility. It means there's room for you to grow up, and there's a place for people who squander the wealth and don't make good use of it, aren't meritorious anymore, to go down. Instead, he provides that as proof of the decline of the white race. Interesting. And also, since when did this decline in white genetics he think actually start? Does he think that what, in like 200 years or less, suddenly you have, maybe even 100 years or less, suddenly you have a huge decrease in pretty much all matrix of productivity, merit, fertility, and so on of the white race, and somehow it's going to bring about their own destruction without much interference from the outside or something? That's a very strange worldview. Can he explain the source of this phenomenon? I'm just wondering, because what I'm saying is the decline brought about by very bad ideas from the left in the last couple of decades, maybe even 100 years. And basically, if we just change the culture, then we can change the trajectory and start dealing with the problems that we have. And it doesn't even have to be going full right wing, just go back to the center at least. No longer stand where, the lefties of 20, 30 years ago are now considered fans of the Austrian painter. I know that there's no correlation between the 1930s Germans and actual right-wing thought, but that's the way that they picture it. They picture it as if the furthest right you can be is fans of the Austrian painter, and then anyone who isn't as left as the left is today is considered that. So if we just stop being so crazy lefties, then maybe we can bring back our civilizations. On the other hand, the view that this is some sort of natural genetic degenerance of the white race that I don't know why it was triggered. I mean, the whole thing about Neanderthal DNA being in white people, not in black people, that should have started, what, thousands, tens of thousands, I don't know how long ago, a few years ago. It's just, it makes no sense. Help me make it make sense. It's just, what is this?
So we expect to have Ubuntu, humanity. Unfortunately, by the strictest definition of what a human being is, white people are just below human beings. You are negotiating with an animal, a wild dog that you're trying to train to be tamed, to be upopi, you who guards your house. You can never do that. So we're expecting Ubuntu from them. We're like, you stole our land, you butchered our people and everything else, and we just want justice. We're not out for your blood. We're not chopping off your heads. We're not doing anything. Why don't you guys understand that? Why don't you guys have Ubuntu? Why don't you guys have a heart? They don't, because they're incapable of that. You cannot expect the same behavior of a human being that you're expecting of a dog.
Right, so you understand the way it's going. And basically, if you're white, according to this guy, you're not human by definition, and you don't have a heart, you don't understand morality, and basically he's saying that his people try to train you like a dog, but you can't even be trained. And this is normal in South Africa. The government there, I don't know if you saw the videos of do they have a president? They're dancing and singing, and the bored white farmer, and cause him pain and his family and so on. Yeah, I don't understand how this is acceptable. How come you don't have pretty much every democracy in the world, just shunning South Africa? No more aid, no more trade, just fix your culture, stop being so genocidal. Isn't this the basic of basics? What is this? And asked Grok for some statistics on the entire thing, and I wondered. It turns out that this post here is roughly accurate. A decrease from 11% of the total population in 1996 to 7.3 in 2022. That was the share of whites in South Africa. About 800,000 less whites than a decade ago, while the rest of the population grew by 18%. And it says here that the forecast is that in 20 years you will stop and take a picture if you see a white man. Elon Musk response: demographics is destiny. And the next post is: if white South Africans aren't African, then no brown British man is British, no black American is American, and so on. You cannot have it one way and not the other. White South Africans are Africans. That's an interesting take on it. The responses that he got in return from lefties were basically that, well, the blacks and browns are, they were forced to go to Europe or America because of, slavery. On the other hand, the whites are colonizers or descendants of them. So because of the actions of your, forefathers, the way we treat you today should be different. This is essentially original sin, isn't it? Also, I'm not 100% sure that you can say everyone that's brown or black in Europe today is a descendant of slaves. In fact, it seems to me that the overwhelming majority of them are not. They are illegal migrants who came into the country against the will of the people there. They are essentially lawbreakers and invaders. And to say that they are any more deserving of good treatment than descendants of white South Africans, in the end, were born there and never broke the law, never actually abused anyone for, their race or anything. They just happened to be descendants of people who were colonizers. What is the greater crime? What you did yourself while alive, you chose to do, or what your ancestors 50 years ago did before you were even born? I wonder. The idea that this is a repeat of what happened in Zimbabwe may well be true. If you know, you know. This is the sort of evolution of white hatred in Zimbabwe, where at first Mugabe said in 2014 that whites can't own land. Then in 2015, Mugabe is asking back the white farmers he chased away. 2016, Zimbabwe pleads for 1.5 billion in food aid to prevent mass starvation. 2017, Zimbabwe begs white farmers to return as country plunges into famine. 2018, Zimbabwe doomed without whites, says outgoing ZANU-PF MP. And 2019, Zimbabwe starts paying white farmers compensation. 2020, Zimbabwe agrees to pay 3.5 billion compensation to white farmers. Well, why am I saying that this has something to do with what we're going to see in South Africa? Because these statistics are apparently true. White farmers in South Africa produce 95.3% of all the corn, 96.9% of all the soybeans, and so on, between 89% and 95% of pretty much everything except cattle, and even there they are 66%. Despite the fact that numerically they are far fewer, both in terms of the actual share of the population as well as their share in farmers and in land ownership. It's just that they're so much more productive. They say that, maybe it's due to access to better technology or what have you, more better education, but it is what it is, that's the truth of it. I'm going to go ahead and ask, how come nobody cares about the sort of decline in population in not just whites in South Africa, but also, for example, Christians in the Middle East? I'm not even talking about how Jews basically disappeared from the entire Middle East apart from Israel. I can tell you what happened there because my family are Jews from the Middle East, and basically my family was chased out of their home countries of Iraq and Iran by, Muslims who were very anti-Jew after the creation of Israel. They were basically quite mad and decided to turn their anger on their neighbors who lived there for generations. And that's why, to save their lives, they ran away. They had to leave. and they were not allowed to take anything apart from the clothes on their back and a tiny amount of money that each family was allowed to take. So you had to leave everything there. They basically put on many layers of clothes to have a change of clothes because you weren't even allowed a suitcase or anything. So that sort of thing, that's fine. The basically genocide of the Yazidis by the Muslims after the extremists took over Syria, that's perfectly okay. That nobody cares about anything that happens unless, of course, the offender is white or maybe Jewish, and then suddenly you care. If you find out how many UN resolutions are against Israel, you'll find there have been a lot of them. However, against South Africa, there have been none. Now, this is despite the fact that if you look at populations, the South African white population decreased by 700,000 to 800,000 and over the last 30 years. And on the other hand, if you look at the Palestinian population, specifically in Gaza and the West Bank, they increased by 2.1 million over the last 30 years. So one of them is considered ethnic cleansing and a genocide, the one where the population increased, while the other does not, where the population decreased. There's also the fact that people are very mad about the black slavery in America, and it was an awful thing. However, if you look at the numbers, there were about 4 million in total, according at least to the statistics that I found here. About 4 million people, and that was through more and more black people being born in captivity. Basically, in terms of about 390 to 400,000 were actually taken from Africa, and they increased by basically 10 times in the United States, just bringing more children in. On the other hand, if you look, for example, at the Muslim slave trade of blacks specifically, it occurred over 1,300 years, and between 10 to 18 million Africans were trafficked, some sources citing even higher figures. This is not included, I believe, not including how many might have been born in Muslim countries. So, why is it that throughout history, we only remember the people who were enslaved by whites, but never the ones enslaved by Muslims? Because there's a narrative here. Nobody cares about any atrocity committed by anyone to anyone, unless, of course, the perpetrator is someone that you hate. If you look at what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghur minority over the Muslim minority over in China, harvesting organs, putting them in concentration camps, committing ethnic cleansing, nobody cares. You get a bit of lip service and that's it. Why? Because the perpetrators are not a group that is targeted currently by the corporations and let's say, in my opinion, personal opinion, treacherous governments of the West. People like Justin Trudeau or Keir Starmer or the likes are, in my opinion, traitors to their own people. The idea that your own population as an ethnic group doesn't exist, so you can't betray them, as the leader of the Green Party over in Germany said, in my opinion, is just a cover-up for your awful betrayal of your own people. And this extends beyond the borders of your own state. Basically, if you see your ethnic group, your religious group, or even others that are not targeted by you, being genocided, then that's fine. They can be killed, they can be driven away, they can be enslaved. Nobody cares. You won't remember it, it won't come up in conversation. We'll only ever give the attention and the condemnation and put pressure to change on specific groups that are blamed for everything, that are Marxist oppressors. Basically, this is a very Marxist worldview that divides the world into oppressors and oppressed, and it lacks completely the ability to deal with the reality that people that you have marked as oppressors might, in some places, be the oppressed, actually, and vice versa. You can even have the same people who were oppressed for a certain amount of time, later on gain their freedom and even gain power, and then oppress somebody else, whether it be the descendants of their oppressors, which, no, two wrongs don't make a right. You don't get to punish the descendants of people who wronged your ancestors and call it good. And on the other hand, you can also have them just victimize some third party that is completely innocent in office. And what do you do if you see this happen and you come from a Marxist worldview? Well, just ignore it. That's what you do. I can't help but feel as though the social standards in the West, as well as the understanding of history and human nature, have deteriorated completely under left-wing orthodoxy. And as a result, we are no longer capable of having an adult, mature discussion on these topics. What we have is entirely a religious discussion, where basically some people are attributed original sin and some people are attributed endless goodness. They cannot be criticized. And as a result, these debates do not mirror reality at all, and we cannot solve anything. Basically, all we have is endless persecution that only can increase of the people that are deemed oppressors, and it's never enough, and it never solves the problem. And as time goes on and your oppression of these people mounts, what happens is that they become bitter, resentful, and hateful of you for the things you are committing against them. And this only creates more and more enmity. It is perpetuates a cycle of hatred. This will never end if we allow things to continue as they are. The only way forward that actually makes a better future is if we start treating people by the content of their characters, not the color of their skins, and also we start to respect the right to self-determination of all groups. Right of self-determination basically means that every people have the right to their own country, where they speak their language, they celebrate their holidays, their culture, their tradition, and you can't go and say, well, actually, all of Europe and the US, basically everywhere white people live, have to be multicultural. They have to import everyone from all over the world, but nobody else has to. So everywhere can have ethnic homogeneity. Everyone else can have self-determination, their own countries with their own cultures, costumes, symbols, religion, history, etc. But only you can't. If you keep with this double standard, with this hypocrisy, well, things will end up being bloody, and I hope it does not. I think it's the worst option for everyone. Not the worst, actually. It's the second worst. The worst option is if things keep going forward as they have. On this trajectory, let's say decades into the future, I think that if white people allow this, it will be worse for them than the other option. However, I think that the bloody option is bad for everyone and not desirable at all. It's basically a last resort if things are that bad for the people who have it that bad. And I hope that we can resolve this in a very peaceful manner. I can see it happening in the US because they have changed trajectory, and we can now actually look forward to a future where you no longer get discriminated against for the color of your skin, no matter what it is. And I think in Europe, it's very much not the case. They do have two-tier societies. That's one of the nicknames of Keir Starmer, two-tier Keir. And it's very obvious that they do have two-tier societies, and something must be done. Hopefully they can do it at the ballot box, because it's preferable to all. The main problem with that is that it seems to be a very big fear of the people currently in power, and that's why they are so censorious, and they tend to ban opposition that sticks out too much. As a result, you have people like Starmer in charge, where basically the man has like a 60% majority with 20% of the vote. 20% of eligible voters voted for Keir Starmer, and if you took a look at the voting pattern, you see that very few people compared to other elections actually bothered to come out and vote this time around. The votes that the Tories lost, because the Labour certainly didn't gain much at all, the votes that the Tories lost basically either went some to reform, or the rest just didn't bother to come out because they don't see a way forward. And honestly, I can tell you that while I think reform is much better than the Labour and the Tories, they're still nowhere near good enough. Nowhere near. They are very much Tories light. They have better rhetoric, they are slightly less destructive, and perhaps they'll be less censorious. But they are still within that paradigm. They are basically going to be progressive, driving the speed limit, as the joke is about the sort of rhino types, the establishment uniparty right-wing types. And this is very worrying. I can see that's pretty much the only person to be in power in the West to condemn what happens in South Africa is Donald Trump. And maybe he will give some aid or asylum or something to white South Africans that want, well, to not be murdered horribly and tortured and stuff. I don't know how much I can actually say about what's being done in South Africa, but it's very, very horrible. It's very inhumane. And saying that, well, their ancestors did it to our ancestors does not justify it. And you're going to get what you wish at this rate. You're going to be exactly like Zimbabwe. I honestly don't know how to solve these deep-rooted conflicts. It's kind of funny to me to hear Europeans say that, well, it's just a sectarian conflict in the Middle East about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Well, they've been doing it for hundreds and thousands of years. What are you talking about? Israel as a country didn't exist until like 1948. We basically had Jewish populations living among the Muslims for many, many centuries. And I can't say that it was always peaceful, but there were pogroms, there were, Muslims deciding to blame Jews because some disease cropped up, or claiming that it's because the Jews poisoned the local well. I wonder, did they think that Jews have modern plumbing in like the 1300s? How exactly did they get this magical purified water so that they and their families wouldn't get sick? Because they live in the same village, I can't understand the logic behind it at all. But it doesn't really matter right now. What I'm saying is that, Jews did have to pay the jizya, the skull tax, just like every other religious minority living in Muslim lands, basically a special tax just for not being Muslim. And they did get terrorized occasionally. They lived let's say, I don't know if it was any worse than in Europe, because in Europe they also had quite a few occurrences that were detrimental, let's say. And that's before even talking about what happened in Germany. So the idea that this is some sort of deep-rooted sectarian conflict that's been going on for, thousands of years is nonsense. But I can tell you that that doesn't mean that we can solve the problem here. It's still very difficult. There's still a lot of bad blood. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of hatred and distrust. And, well, I can tell you that from my perspective as an Israeli citizen, I can see that there won't be peace, because the way that the Palestinians literally groom their children is to believe that Jews are subhumans, that they're like apes, that they need to be killed, and it's your moral obligation that you'll go to heaven if you do. And they do that from a very young age. I'm talking like kindergarten. So you have videos on the net right now that show you kids being taught that this is what they should do, and saying, you have like 5-year-old kids going, yeah, I'm going to be a shaheed when I grow up and go and kill the Jews. So I don't think under these conditions it's possible to have peace. You have a population educated to hate and kill the other, and they basically have been taught that nothing but the complete eradication of Israel and all of the territory being theirs is going to cut it. And this really has no answer. Now, is it any better in South Africa? My gut feeling, based on what I'm seeing from basically the leader of the country openly dancing and singing about torturing and ending the white farmers, I don't think it's any better. It might be just the same. I don't know if it can be worse, honestly. Well, it is worse in the sense that they are under the power of these genocidal guys, while we are not. We are the ones in power over the genocidal guys here. And as you can see, despite the fact that we have conflicts with them and we do restrict their freedoms in order to stop them from actually enacting the genocides, their population is still growing rapidly. Unlike the white population in South Africa, unlike the Jewish, Christian, Yazidi, and so on, many other minorities all over the Middle East. It's important to look at the fact, not just what all those NGOs and the UN say, because honestly, they're all left-wing activists. Most of them, it seems, funded by people like Bill Gates and George Soros. His Open Foundation has, I believe, over 200 NGOs just in tiny little Israel. You must understand, we have like 10 million people living here, and George Soros still spends an ocean of money to have at least 200 NGOs that he directly funds, mind you. Often these NGOs then fund other groups further down this pyramid scheme. It's amazing how a few people at the top have sort of embedded their ideas in the entirety of society through these pyramid schemes, where top to bottom they pay stupid, insane amounts of money to activists who then, disperse it slowly to more and more and more people. And of course you have their influence in media, that's very easy to track, but you have their influence basically everywhere else. You wouldn't even think about it, but you could have like a school program to, feed poor students or something, and actually they get money from these guys, and they all, let's say, adhere to these beliefs So suddenly they have more influence in schools over the management, over the staff there through these programs. Oh, you want the program to go there? Well, let's see if you uphold our standards of democracy and openness and progressivism. That's how they get you. Basically, they're everywhere, and it's very difficult to escape. And honestly, I think our world would be much more peaceful without them, like much less angry and hateful. They basically foment dissent everywhere they go, and I blame at least some of what's happening in countries like South Africa on these people, because they created this narrative and they perfected it, they protect it. So if people want to right now criticize the way things are going in South Africa, they have to go through this wall, the blue wall of Democrats that absolutely will object to any criticism of what's going on there on the basis that you're racist for doing so, regardless of the morality or legality of what is actually happening in South Africa. Just noticing that something wrong is being done by black people to white people is enough to be called a racist, to be excommunicated from the mainstream, be banned from everywhere. At least under Biden. Hopefully now it's different. And so, if only we didn't have all of those NGOs and slash funds, etc., from people like the Soros and Gates Foundations, basically pushing against trying to heal things, then we could actually, have a normal society where push and pull exists, and people like this, like these two black gentlemen who talk about the inferiority of the white race, would be punished by society, not directly, not thrown in jail or anything, but people would disassociate with them, and this would result in people changing the tune. Basically, what is and isn't acceptable will change naturally if you don't interfere with it. Right now, we have somebody putting their thumb on the scale and forcing their opinions. There is no discourse, there's only my way or the highway. I just want the thumb off the scale, that's all. Thanks for watching, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.